So as we close out 2025, there's this feeling, right? It's almost this physical sensation that the whole world is just running on empty when it comes to trusting each other.
It really is.
And that's what we're diving into today, this catastrophic absence of trust, this feeling that nations are fundamentally losing faith in one another. Our mission here is to give you a shortcut to understanding how this, very emotional, very political reality is ripping holes in global finance and making 2026 look, well, frankly, pretty terrifying.
That's right. We're unpacking the consequences. And,
Yeah.
and to really get the scale of shift we're seeing now, you have to look back.
Okay.
Our sources, they trace the current crisis all the way back to 2022. And they pinpoint one key moment that was, well, in hindsight, it was the first major fracture.
And that was,
The decision by Western powers to disconnect Russia from the international SWIFT payment system.
okay, let's unpack that because it's a huge point. That move, it wasn't just another financial sanction. Even at the time, analysts were calling it a foundational mistake. Why was it so catastrophic for global trust?
Because it signaled that the world's dominant financial infrastructure.
Which everyone just sort of assumed was a neutral utility. Right?
Exactly. It was treated as this neutral global utility, and suddenly it was. It was officially weaponized. The moment the U.S. and Europe showed they were willing to just flick a switch and cut off a major economy, they broke the fundamental trust that financial rules are supposed to be immutable, that they're not political.
And that one precedent changed everything. It basically forced any country that wasn't, perfectly aligned with the West to realize their financial security depends entirely on political whims.
That's it.
So 3 years later, the thesis of all the material we've gathered is crystal clear. This breakdown is pervasive, it's everywhere, and it's not just in war zones. It's affecting traditional alliances, economic deals. It's making the path forward look, as the source says, pretty difficult.
It looks difficult because the very foundations of how we conduct ourselves globally, this idea that even if we disagree, we play by a shared set of rules, that's all been compromised.
So let's start where that distrust is, I guess, the sharpest, the flashpoint in Ukraine. Our sources suggest that for all the talk of peace, the sheer lack of trust makes any real resolution. Well, highly unlikely.
The observation in the source is brutal. It says the leaders involved don't trust each other, and then it goes further. It says they hate each other.
And when hate enters the diplomatic room, you're not looking for compromise anymore.
No, you're demanding submission. And we see that deepening animosity in the events cited right at the end of 2025. I mean, look at the cycle of accusation and denial.
Right, the Russian leader accusing the Ukrainians of sending drones into his personal residence.
A stunning claim. I mean, a truly personal, direct accusation.
Which was immediately followed by the Ukrainian government just flatly denying it, a categorical denial.
Exactly. And the ripple effect is immediate. It's escalatory. You have the Russian foreign minister promising retribution. You have the American president expressing disapproval over the rhetoric.
So it's not diplomacy anymore. It's a public breakdown of trust, but with military implications.
And the sources confirm the trust problem has gotten so much worse over these last 3 years. Which, it doesn't really bode well for any kind of resolution anytime soon. The lines of communication aren't just strained. They're being used to amplify anger.
But then the sources pivot pretty quickly. And this is a key takeaway for you, the listener. This deficit isn't just an active conflict zones. The fracturing of traditionally strong relationships, specifically among Western allies, that's just as alarming.
That is such a critical point. When the material talks about the erosion of stability, one of the most surprising examples they use is the relationship between Canada and the United States.
An alliance that's supposed to be rock solid.
Supposed to be, but they're saying it is fundamentally broken.
The analysts say the trust between them has been broken unequivocally, that's the phrase, and they tie it directly to political rhetoric south of the border.
They do. They highlight comments by President Trump, openly talking about annexing Canada, making it the 51st state, promising lower taxes, better protection.
Things you might normally dismiss as just campaign trail bluster.
Right, but the source is cited as an immediate destroyer of diplomatic comfort. And what's really shocking is the evidence they give to back it up. They note that Canadians have actually stopped crossing the border regularly because of this shift in the atmosphere.
That is profound. That's political words causing a material, physical change in behavior that's potentially hitting trade, local economies.
It is.
When you have that kind of friction where a politician's comments can make people physically avoid interaction, the underlying trust is clearly gone.
Absolutely. The foundation of mutual respect that let the world's longest undefended border work has just been It's been replaced by suspicion. And if that relationship can fracture, every other alliance is at risk.
And that risk is showing up everywhere. The list of strained relationships is long. The sources list them out. Europe and the U.S., which is mostly about tariffs and trade.
Mhm.
The U.S. and Venezuela, the U.S. and Brazil, again, trade barriers. And then you have to mention the recent shooting war between Thailand and Cambodia and the ongoing problems in South Sudan and Yemen.
If you connect all those dots, it just underscores the main point. Distrust is the default setting globally right now. That shared assumption of stability has just evaporated.
That's a powerful argument for geopolitical risk, but let's talk about where that uncertainty really hits home. On the balance sheet, how does all this political distrust translate into actual financial risk? Which brings us to the economic side of this.
This is where you see the most immediate reaction. The single biggest breach of financial trust that our sources cite, the one that really shook the global foundation, was the attempt by Europeans to confiscate Russian sovereign assets.
And just to be super clear for everyone listening, we're talking about their federal assets, right? Their actual reserve currency holdings, money held in foreign banks.
Exactly. Targeting the core assets of a major global power. And the sources are clear. The attempt itself, whether it worked or not, was seen as an act that significantly weakens the global economy. It just violates a foundational norm.
So when nations feel they can't rely on their overseas holdings being safe, the whole structure just becomes unstable.
Totally unstable. And there's this fascinating detail about why it didn't happen right away. It all came down to one nation.
Belgium.
Yes, the crucial role of Belgium.
Yeah.
The sources explain that Belgium refused to go along with the request to confiscate the property. And the reason was because it held the clearinghouse.
Okay, for those of us not deep in financial jargon, what does held the clearinghouse actually mean here?
So the clearinghouse is, it's the central mechanism. It settles and records all these international securities transactions. It's the physical and legal pipeline that the assets move through.
Ah, so they literally controlled the pipes.
They controlled the pipes. So they had the power to block the move. But, and this is the danger the sources highlight, the attempt was made. That set the precedent. It showed that financial sovereignty could be erased overnight because of a political conflict.
And if a superpower's property can be targeted,
Then whose capital is truly safe? Nobody's.
so if money is terrified, what are we seeing in the market? Where is all that global capital actually running to?
We are seeing a massive flight to places that are promising stability and, more importantly, financial trustworthiness. Our sources identify three main hubs that are benefiting:
Which are?
the UAE, Singapore, and Hong Kong.
And why those three? I mean, they're pretty far from the traditional financial capitals in the West.
Because they're offering stability and a promise of neutrality that is so crucial right now. This shift, it's not just about tax rates, it's fundamentally about the sanctity of property rights. It's the belief that the rules won't just change overnight because of some political fight.
They're essentially selling themselves as non-weaponizable finance zones.
That's a great way to put it. They're seen as places that are unlikely to bow to G7 pressure and seize assets. They're marketing reliable governance in a period of maximum global instability.
Which brings us to our third segment, the path forward. How do we start rebuilding trust in 2026? Because, I mean, if the global system is defined by mistrust and capital flight, that's just not sustainable.
It isn't. And the analysts remind us that these trust issues, they often go back generations. They're not sudden breaks. They're old fractures coming to a head. The analogy they use is that somebody's grandfather didn't like somebody else's grandfather.
But the difference now is that it poses a systemic global risk.
Exactly.
And history gives us a blueprint for this, right? The material brings up this idea that even warring parties need a minimum level of sanity, of trust. They reference the Magna Carta as a historical example.
The Magna Carta analogy is so powerful because it represents an agreement. It's a foundational set of rules that even those in power have to follow. It establishes clear limits. The implication is we need a new global framework like that to stop the chaos.
So the consensus is that 2026 has to be a year of rebuilding trust. But that requires leaders who are conciliatory, who are committed to diplomacy. The challenge is actually finding them.
It is. And the sources analyze some of the key global figures: President Trump, President Xi of China, President Putin, Prime Minister Modi of India, and their capacity for this.
Sure. The analysis is pretty nuanced. For example, President Trump's rhetoric, as we talked about with Canada, is clearly seen as highly disruptive. But the source material also gives a lot of attention to Prime Minister Modi.
It does.
What's the specific nuance there with Modi?
Well, the sources note that while he tries to project this conciliatory, stable image in the West on the global stage, he isn't always seen that way by the population at home in India.
Ah, okay.
And that highlights this critical contradiction. A leader's ability to build trust abroad can be completely undermined if their actions at home are seen as divisive. The perception of trustworthiness just changes dramatically depending on where you're standing.
That is such a critical factor. You can't just separate diplomacy from domestic policy anymore. And finally, the whole reason this feels so much bigger now, the superpower factor.
Right. The sources acknowledge that global trust has been broken many times since 2000. But this escalation feels unique. It's unique because the conflict involves a superpower, or really a clash among superpowers.
So when a major global player breaks the norm, whether it's seizing assets or weaponizing SWIFT,
The problem is just magnified for the entire world. It turns regional spats into systemic global risks that hit trade, currency, stability everywhere.
okay, so let's wrap this up for you. The main takeaway is that this trust deficit is real, it's active, it's not just in war zones, it's eroding key alliances like the US and Canada. And crucially, this distrust is causing material shifts in global finance. It is literally moving capital out of Western hubs and into new centers like the UAE, Singapore, and Hong Kong. We are heading into 2026 with a massive bill coming due for 3 years of broken promises.
Indeed. And if we go back to that idea that the world looks fundamentally different depending on where you stand, standing in Dresden versus Dhaka, as the sources put it, the challenge is universal, even if the view of it isn't.
So we want to leave you with a final thought, something to mull over. If the goal is to rebuild trust, and historical agreements like the Magna Carta were key to setting rules between competing parties.
What modern global institution, or maybe what set of universally accepted digital or financial standards, could possibly act as that equivalent foundation for trust in our current fractured world? What global agreement could be so binding that it protect assets and relationships against a unilateral breach by a superpower? That's really the challenge for 2026.
A heavy thought, but a necessary one. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.